So today we're doing example 6.4 to 6.5, which is just solving square root equations. So here they go. The way you solve a square root equation, you first need to isolate the square root. So on example number 1, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move this minus 5 to the right side by doing a plus 5. So number 1, the square root of x plus 7 equals x plus 5. So step 1, isolate your square root. Done. Step 2, now you can get rid of the square root by squaring both sides of this equation. So I'm going to put this in parentheses and square it to cancel the square root. I'm going to put this in parentheses and square it. So your square root will cancel out with that square, so that's just going to become x plus 7. Okay, now here's the tricky part, and this is the most missed part. When you have x plus 5 squared, okay, that's a binomial. You're supposed to FOIL it out completely to get x squared plus 10x plus 25. A lot of students forget this plus 10x here because they don't completely FOIL it out, so you need to FOIL it out completely. So the whole FOIL. I don't do the whole FOIL. Like, all I do is I use this formula. Let me give you the formula in case you didn't know. But so the formula, when you have a binomial like a plus b and you're squaring it, it doesn't just become a squared plus b squared. It becomes a squared, kind of what I did here, x squared, plus 2 times ab. Like, you need to take twice the product of a times b. And then you do plus b squared. So that's basically what I used here in this square process here. Like, I took x squared, and then I did 5 times x is 5x, so that's ab. Then I did twice as much, so 10x plus 25. Question, Kaden?
How come you don't need the absolute value sign there on x plus 7?
Continuing. So now that you have that, that was the new thing. So from here, the rest of it is just the same as you've been doing, I guess, this whole unit. You need to solve for this quadratic. So the one way to solve for the quadratic is to set it equal to 0 and then just try to factor. So I'm going to move x to the right, and I'm going to move positive 7 to the right. So it's going to become x squared plus 9x plus 25 minus 7. I feel like it's 18. It sure is. So 18, and then just solve by factoring. 6 times 3 is going to give you 18. And then if you put positive 6 and positive 3, that will give you positive 9. And now you solve by setting each factor equal to 0. So x plus 6 is equal to 0. X plus 3 is equal to 0. So here are my answers. X equals negative 6. And x equals negative 3. But you're going to have to be careful because there are such things as extraneous solutions when it comes to the square root functions. So very carefully check for extraneous solutions. For extraneous solutions. So you do have to check for extraneous solutions when it comes to the square root functions. And what you do is you take your answers and you plug them in. You can plug them in into the very original equation, or you can plug them once you isolated the square root. Either one's okay. I like to plug them in this step where I isolated the square root already. But you need to plug them in somewhere where there's still a square root. So you have to go plug them in somewhere where there is still a square root. So I'm going to plug them in here. The square root of x plus 7 equals x plus 5. So let me start with negative 6. If I plug in negative 6 in here, this can be the square root of negative 6 plus 7 equals negative 6 plus 1. This is the square root of 1 equals negative 1. Okay, so you can't, a square root can't equal to a negative value. Like, the square root of 1 is not negative 1. The square root of 1 is just 1. So this is not going to be a solution. Unlike, let's try negative 3. So that's the square root of negative 3 plus 7 equals negative 3 plus 5. So this is going to be the square root of 4 equals 2. Like, that's correct. So this was a no. This is a yes. The square root of 4 is 2. So final answer for number 1 would be x equals negative 3 only. And I think these are also multiple choice on your test. So only select the one that has the negative 3 and not the negative 6. So pause for questions. If you don't have any questions, try number 2. Just keep working. Number 2. In order for you to solve a square root equation, you have to isolate the square root. The problem with number 2 is that there's two different square roots. So you first just have to pick one and isolate that. So we're either going to isolate the square root of 5x plus 6, which is what I'm going to do, or you could choose to isolate the square root of 3x plus 3. Either way is correct. You should still get to the same final answer. I'm going to go ahead and isolate the square root of 5x plus 6. So in other words, let me bring this the plus 3 to the right with the minus 3. So this will become square root of 5x plus 6 equals the square root of 3x plus 3, and then 4 minus this 3 would be a plus 1. Okay, now like I said on number 1, we have to square both sides. Square both sides. When you square the square root, that will cancel each other out, and you can just write 5x plus 6. No absolute value because we didn't actually take a square root. We actually squared it. Okay, now again, here's the most missed part. When you have the square root of 3x plus 3 plus 1, that's a binomial. You're going to have to like FOIL it all the way out. Or you can use this formula that I gave you. For this time, I'm just going to FOIL it all the way out so that you can see what it looks like. So I'm going to do the square root of 3x plus 3 plus 1 times the square root of 3x plus 3 plus 1. So right now I'm choosing to do the whole FOILing all the way out. You could just choose to use that formula. So when you FOIL this baby out, it's going to be the square root of 3x plus 3 times the square root of 3x plus 3 will just be 3x plus 3. Keep going. The square root of 3x plus 3, when you multiply by times of 1, that's just the square root of 3x plus 3. Okay, and that was just like the first half of the FOIL. Here comes the next half. So for the next half of the FOIL, you need to do 1 times the square root of 3x plus 3. Well, that's going to be another square root of 3x plus 3. And then finally 1 times 1. So notice how that's where that formula comes from. You get a squared, so that's this 3x plus 3. And now notice how you have 2 square roots of 3x plus 3, so you have to put plus 2 square root of 3x plus 3. So that's where this 2ab comes from. And then finally there's a plus 1, which is your b squared. Now remember that all that was equal to the 5x plus 6. Okay, so that was the hard part on example number 2. Because now what you need to do is you kind of just have to start all over by isolating the square root of 3x plus 3 now. So basically this just becomes like example number 1. I need you to combine like terms, move stuff around so that you get this square root of 3x plus 3 isolated and by itself. So I guess I'm going to start by moving my 3x to the left. So 5x minus 3x is 2x. And then if I move the 3 and the 1 to the left, that's going to be 6 minus 3 minus 1. It's going to be a positive 2. And that equals the 2 square root of 3x plus 3. So again, I'm just trying to isolate the square root of 3x plus 3. And I do need to get rid of the 2 that's in front of the square root, so divide everything by 2. I'm going to rewrite it here. So x plus 1 equals the square root of 3x plus 3. Now you just square both sides again and use that formula again. So now I have the square root of 3x plus 3 isolated because I did it correctly. Yep. And now to get rid of the square root, you're just going to square both sides. And this x plus 1 square is easy, but let's just use the formula. It's going to be an x squared plus 2 times ab, so you have to multiply 1 times x is 1x, but then you have to do twice as that, so 2x plus 1 equals just 3x plus 3 because the square root will be gone. And now set it equal to 0 and factor. It should be easily factored if now you did it wrong. So this is going to be x squared minus x minus 2. And don't forget to check for the extraneous solutions on these. So the factors should be x minus 2 and x plus 1. So your solution should be x equals 2 and x equals negative 1. It's possible for both solutions to work, so you would just select both answers. It's also possible for neither one of the solutions to work, like they can both be extraneous, so you would put no solution. You're just gonna have to check. So remember that you need to check somewhere where there's still, in this case, you need to check somewhere where there's still 2 square roots. So either in the very, very beginning where there's still 2 square roots, or on this first step that I wrote. I'm going to check in that step right here. So I'm going to check the square root of 5x plus 6 equals the square root of 3x plus 3 plus 1. So I'm going to check in that step because it still has 2 square roots. And I just need to plug them in and check. Let's start with 2. So the square root of 5 times 2 is 10 plus 6 is 16. That should equal the square root of 3 times 2 is 6, 7, 8, 9, 9. So this looks like it's going to work because the square root of 16 is 4. And this is 3 plus 1 is 4. So that one works. And now let's try the negative one and see if that one works. Again, you just need to plug it in there. I guess I'll do it here. 5 times negative 1 is negative 5 plus 6 is 1. And then over here, square root of 3 times negative 1 is negative 3 plus 3, that's 0. So this one actually looks like both answers work because the square root of 1 is equal to the square root of 0 plus 1. So number 2. Done. Pause for questions. So examples 3 and 4 are not square root equations. Examples 3 and 4 are not square root equations because they don't have a variable inside the square root. Because they don't have a variable, or pretty much x, inside the square root. So when you get to something, if you see something like examples 3 and 4 on your test, then there's a different way to solve those. You're not supposed to solve them like you did examples 1 and 2 because then you're going to get extra answers and it's not going to be correct. So remember, if there is an x inside of the square root, then you solve it by isolating the square root and squaring both sides and everything I just showed you. However, when you get to example 3 and 4, here's how you do it. Example 3. To solve for x there, you do have to isolate the x. So let's isolate x. So in other words, get rid of this positive 4 and move it to the right. So I'm going to have x square root of 2 equals 14 minus 4 is 10. And now, instead of square, like don't square both sides because then you get extra solutions. So now all you have to do to solve for x is just get rid of the square root of 2 by dividing both sides by the square root of 2. So your answer should be just easy peasy, x equals 10 divided by the square root of 2. There's no need to square both sides, because if you do square both sides, then you end up getting like extra solutions and you're getting more work and you're wasting more time. So the answer for number 3 should just be 10 over the square root of 2. Although I think I rationalized the answer, so that would be correct. But like I said, these are mainly multiple choice, so you won't see that as a choice. You're gonna have to like rationalize it. So to rationalize, just multiply by the square root of 2 over the square root of 2. So the answer should be 10 root 2 over 2. And then of course you have to simplify. 5 root 2. So example number 3. The final answer, 10 root 2 is the correct, 10 over the square root of 2 is correct, but the final simplified answer should just be 5 root 2. So that's the best way to solve that one. And I'm pretty sure I forgot to put one like that on the progressive test, but I might put it on the final because I'm not done with your final yet. Just keep it in mind. And then try the last one, example 4. I guess I'll put it right here. Same thing, example 4, you want to isolate x. Isolate x. The problem with example 4 is that there's 2 terms with an x. So let's just move both of those terms to one side of the equal sign. I'm going to move the x square root of 5 to the left. So I'm going to put x minus x square root of 5 equals 8. So example 4 became x minus x square root of 5 equals 8. And then, so this is the one I like because it involves multiple skills here. What you're going to have to do to solve for x, since both of these terms have an x, you're going to have to factor out the x. It's called the GCF. So this term, x, and this minus x root 5 have a greatest common factor, which is x. So I'm going to factor it out. And by factor it out, I mean like divide. So x divided by x becomes 1. Negative x root 5, if I divide it by x, becomes negative root 5. And that still equals 8. So if I put 1 on the final, this would probably be it because it has a lot of skills here. So again, I just did the opposite of distributing property. I took out the x. And you can always confirm and see if it's right. If you multiply x times 1, that should give you x. X times negative root 5, that should give you negative x root 5. And then finally, to solve for x, just divide by this 1 minus root 5. So here's your final answer. X equals 8 divided by 1 minus root 5. So again, that would be correct. And if you see that as the answer choice, you can select that. But since there's a radical on the denominator, we're going to rationalize it. And this is why I like this question. So to rationalize this one, you're going to have to remember something called a conjugate. And the conjugate is when you do 1 plus, you switch the sign of the second term, root 5. So 1 plus root 5. So the number, example 4 becomes, you're going to have to multiply 8 times 1 and 8 times root 5. So 8 plus 8 root 5 all over 1 times 1 is 1. Negative root 5 times positive root 5 would be just negative 5. And this looks like it can be reduced since 1 minus 5 is negative 4. So this becomes a negative 4. So you can reduce that and give me negative 2 minus 2 root 5. Yeah, so both of these are equivalent. I think you would see negative 2 minus 2 root 5 as the final multiple choice answer. So negative 2 minus 2 root 5. Question? Pause for questions. Alright, so number 5, word problem. You will see one of those on your test. It's pretty easy, the one I put on the test, but let's try this one. Example 5. Oil is leaking from a tank at an average speed in feet per second, s, modeled by this function. So s is the speed. D is the depth of the oil tank. If the average speed is 20 feet per second, what is the depth? Okay, so this one should be pretty just simple. So 20 feet should be the S, so 20 equals 8 square root of D minus 2. Oh, so that should be just easy. In order to solve it, this is a square root equation because there is a variable inside of the square root, so I'm just going to divide by 8. So 20 divided by 8 is 5/2. Yes, 5/2 equals the square root of D minus 2. And now you can get rid of the square. You can get rid of the square root by squaring the left side and the right side. So the one on the test is easier because it doesn't have fractions like this. It's just nice integers. But this would be 25/4 equals D minus 2. And finally, to solve for D, you add 2. So adding 2 should be adding 8/4. So that should be 33/4. And then I don't know what the units are, but feet, I guess. And that's today's examples.